Hi everyone. Today I want to talk to you about staging darkness in Macbeth, and I've subtitled this presentation Engaging Audience Imagination on Page, Stage, and Screen. So what I really want to think about today is questions of physical darkness, the absence of light in the play. And of course this can be linked to or suggest moral darkness, and also I think ideas of confusion, right, of not being able to actually see what's happening on stage. And I want to consider questions of, I want to think about the ways that Shakespeare is maybe asking or imagining his audiences as participating in the creation of the imagined environment of the play, the world of the play, and how that might change as the medium changes. So an idea of how much the audience is a spectator or a participant in the action or in the environment, in the authorship of the play. And if this is different when we read the play versus when we see it live on stage in person versus when we see it a film, or even especially today, a performance that may be live or may be recorded, but we're seeing digitally, right, via Zoom or some other similar medium. And I also want to think about what it means for the play when we show darkness versus when we describe it. And the idea of how darkness visible limits other ways that we can get information, right? If the stage is very dark, we maybe can't actually see what's going on. If the stage is lit and the actors have to tell us that it's dark, we can see what's happening, but is there a cost associated there with our experience of the story? And how do we as readers imagine darkness? What can be lost or gained by readers of this play, or any play, seeing it in performance and taking in an interpretation of the play? So Macbeth is first performed in the early 1600s. We don't know exactly when, but probably somewhere around 1606, which is early in the reign of James I, and it's probably performed at Hampton Court Palace at the Great Hall. And here is this is a photograph of the current Hampton Court Palace Hall, and it's the same building. But James was the next monarch after Queen Elizabeth. She had died in 1603 without an heir, and so James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England as well. He is his great-grandmother was Elizabeth's aunt. She was the sister of Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father. So what we have in Macbeth is basically a play about a Scottish king being performed for a Scottish king, who is also an English king, or at least he's the King of England. This play would have been performed, as Ms. Reeves discusses in her Othello lecture. Shakespeare is writing a play for actors to perform rather than for people to read, which does not necessarily mean, right, that people wouldn't have read it, but that's not sort of his main goal, right? Although probably about half of Shakespeare's plays were published in his lifetime, we only have the text of Macbeth, this specific play, from the First Folio, which is printed in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, by some of his friends who were also members of the King's Men, the company that he acted with and wrote for. But even though Shakespeare doesn't write for publication, he does write for language, right? He writes with this really rich, descriptive language. So he writes for an audience that is not only watching a play, but listening, right? And this language has both a visual and an auditory effect. We hear it, but it causes us to view things in a certain way. And that's, I think, lucky for us because as readers today, we get the benefit of that, right? So let's look at Act 2, Scene 1. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have just solidified their plan to murder Duncan in the previous scene. They've left the stage to mock the time with fairest show, and let their bright faces hide what's in their dark hearts. Banquo and Fleance enter. And the stage directions tell us that Fleance is carrying a torch, but we know that stage directions are largely editorial. They're provided by editors. They may or may not reflect what actually happened in performance. In original performances, they may or may not reflect the author's wishes or intentions, and they are often there because that's what makes sense, right? Reading the play, somebody says a certain thing and you're like, oh, 2 pages ago this person must have entered or exited or had this thing with them, right? But Banquo and Fleance enter, and whether or not, well, if we don't see, I should say, Fleance carrying a torch, how do we know that it's dark if we're just reading the play? Well, we look at the language, and this is how the editors find it too, right? The first line, Banquo says, "How goes the night, boy?" That is, how late into the night is it? What time is it? How much of the night has passed? So now we know it's night. Fleance responds, "The moon is down. I have not heard the clock. So I don't know what time it is, but I know that the moon has set. So now we know it's dark and there's no moonlight." And in a few lines, Banquo is going to talk about how it's definitely after midnight because the moon sets at midnight. And he will tell us that it is so dark because there's no starlight. The stars are not out either. Now, reading this, you may just breeze through these descriptions, but it's likely that you're using these clues, even if only subconsciously, to create this scene, to imagine medieval Scotland in the middle of the night. And so here's an example from the Stratford Festival production in Canada from 2016. And you can see that here it's quite dark. And this whole production is quite dimly lit. And you can see Banquo there carrying on Fleance, and there's a small light lantern on the stage. But it's really, really darkly lit, right? So the choice here in this production has been to show us the physical darkness and to immerse the audience in it as well, right? Shakespeare's audiences would have seen something more akin to this top picture that you see, the Shakespeare's Globe production, where the actors are in light. We can see them. We can see everything on the stage. And we can see each other because the audience has light on them as well. So we know that it is a dark night, a moonless night, perfect for, say a murder, which we have been told at the end of the previous scene, a few lines earlier, that this murder is imminent. And now we know how ripe the setting is for it. And you see here, this is the Folger Theatre's production from 2008 that they did in conjunction with True River Theatre. And it again is quite dark. You see Banquo in the center there and Fleance to the right. And they are wearing colors that reflect the light. Fleance is in white, right? But there is a very, very dark scene with a bright light shining right on them to draw your eye to them, but also it isolates them in a pool of darkness on the stage, right? And Banquo is going to say, there's husbandry in heaven, their candles are all out, right? There are no stars shining. And this sense of darkness is strengthened when Macbeth shows up a moment later, and Banquo grabs his sword and demands, "Who's there?" This should take you back to Hamlet and to Dr. Van Hoot's lecture on Hamlet, right? What does it tell us? Not only that someone is on guard, it means, right, that there's something worth guarding, and we know that Duncan is there, but that this guard, Banquo, seems a little jumpy in the dark, arguably, maybe. And as a reader, you have to create all of this in your imagination. The idea that it's dark and how people are reacting, the idea that maybe Banquo doesn't recognize Macbeth at first, even though he theoretically probably has a torch, and Macbeth probably has a torch, right? Because they're coming out in the night to talk to each other. But there's no moon and there's no stars, right? As a spectator, if you go to see this play, you might be provided with the atmosphere as you are here. Now, directors of Shakespeare I think, mine the text for clues to the setting. I've directed Macbeth before. I've performed in a couple of productions of it. And I have to say, in my experience, you really pay attention to all of these details. For Shakespeare, though, there aren't really directors as we think of them today, don't really show up until the 1800s in theater. Early modern companies often had a sort of a senior actor who would sort of take the reins, but they also had very little in the way of what we call production. No real set, very little furniture or props, and virtually no lighting. So at venues like Hampton Court, right, where it was originally performed, probably, they would have performed in great halls. You can see in this great hall that there are lots of windows. So there's maybe you're guessing, I don't know, maybe there's some sunlight happening. But probably performances for court are not happening in the middle of the afternoon. And so they probably have performed at night by candlelight. A universal lighting, the audience isn't sitting in the dark, right? They have light as well. And a lighting that doesn't change as much over the course of the play. You can sort of put out a candle, add a few extra candles, you can change the lighting levels a little. But it's not something I think that early modern actors were really, or playwrights were really trying to do. They're relying instead on the audience to imagine what time it is and to show the audience what time of day or night it might be by their words and by their actions. At the Globe, where we have a record of a spectator that actually writes that he saw Macbeth at the Globe in April of 1611. At the Globe, there would have been static universal lighting as well, but this would have been afternoon sunlight. Plays are happening in the afternoon, and if you can see here, this is if you're standing on the floor, and this is the Shakespeare's Globe that is there today. It's not the original building, but the roof is open. The roof is open, and so you get the sunlight coming in. And again, the actors and audience can all see each other. Plays also might have been performed in an indoor playhouse, such as the Blackfriars, which would have been the theater that Shakespeare's company performed in. So this is the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, which is a recreation of what we think sort of those kind of theaters would have looked like. We know less about it dimensionally than we do about the Globe, but this is actually sort of part of the Shakespeare's Globe complex in London, so you could visit it if international travel was a thing that we could do right now. But the indoor playhouses like the Blackfriars may have been a little more adjustable because you can raise and lower the chandeliers. You can see here that they have all of these chandeliers that you can bring up and down. But they are lit by candlelight, and the audience is by no means in the dark. And you don't really have the lighting range that we would have today, that we would expect. But of course, Shakespeare is not expecting this. He's not writing for a theater that can do this. He's writing for a theater that he would not assume would have these powers, right, or these abilities. Shakespeare, I think, instead invites the audience, and by extension the reader today, to participate in the creation of the play by providing descriptive language for us. Let's look at Act 3, Scene 3. This is Banquo's murder scene. Early in the scene, the first murderer tells us, "The west yet glimmers with some streaks of day, now spurs the lated traveler apace to gain the timely inn." So it's the time of day when travelers are hurrying to get off the road before it's totally dark. And it's not totally dark yet. And remember, I mentioned how this physical darkness can sort of imply a moral darkness, right? Yet at this point, Banquo is still alive. Macbeth is not totally in the dark, right? Because this murder, this next step, that is not Duncan, hasn't been taken yet. But by the end of the scene, it will be dark, and the light will be out, right? And Macbeth will be sort of further down the path of irredeemability, maybe, arguably. But that's another lecture. For this, I want to think about the way that Shakespeare's audiences probably understand the situation as a familiar or relatable situation, right? They don't have to stretch too far to think of a time when, and you may understand this in the same way, a time when you thought, oh, it's getting dark, I'd better get home or I better get inside. And two, I think for our purposes here, we can think about the way that this sort of imaginative labor on the part of the audience would have been expected by them. They would have shown up to the theater, maybe not consciously thinking about, but not being shocked by having to do that work mentally. And you can see here, this is the Shakespeare's Globe production in 2020 at the Wanamaker, that there is universal lighting. Even though the west yet glimmers with some streaks of day, the sun's almost down, we can still see everything. It's perfectly visible, and everyone can see each other. So we all, including the audience, have to participate in this fiction of the play that it's getting dark. Fast forward through theater history, adjustable light, gas light, colored light, etc., to electric lighting in the theater and the ability to do a lot more with lighting. For a 20th and 21st century audience, we expect more to be immersed in a production's particular vision than to participate in creating that vision. We expect to sort of exist physically in the world that the characters are existing in, rather than exist in and participate in this sort of authorial or imaginative creation of the environment that the playwright and the actors are existing in. So this production is the Stratford Festival in 2016 again, and it's very dark. It's a very darkly lit production generally. And this specific scene, if you look at the still here, there's two murderers and like maybe a lantern. And one guy you can see, you'd be like, okay, that's a guy. The other guy in the middle, you can maybe see like a nose and maybe like part of his hand, but it's very dark. The lights are turned way down, and there are also shadows, what we call gobos, sort of shadow effects put over the lights to create the sense of it like maybe in a forest, right? And then it's even darker. And so how different is it when nighttime is so easily shown to us in contrast with other scenes, when the lights change, when there can be brightness and darkness, right? Do we still, as audience members, help to create the world of the play? Or does that maybe lead us to empathize more or less with characters in the play? Do we feel differently for Banquo when we can see everything that's happening and we have sort of a dramatic irony, right? That we know exactly what happened in that scene, in this murder. Or do we feel more like Macbeth, maybe unsure? There are productions I've seen where it's so dark, and I think the Stratford Festival production is one where the murder happens mostly in the dark, and there are like sort of flashes of what would be lightning, right? Flashes of light, so you can see moments, but you can't really follow the action of who is stabbing who and what's actually happening. So you might not really know until the murderers say to Macbeth, like he's lying in a ditch with 20 gashes or whatever, but Fleance got away. You might not know those things. So you might be living in this sort of state of uncertainty that Macbeth is living in, between ordering the murder and hearing that it's been done, right? So are we more spectator-like? Are we more participatory in the world? Or do we participate more in the creation of that world in these various situations? Contemporary stage productions seem to often go very dark, sometimes to the point, as I said, of not being able to tell what's really happening. Here are some other productions in this scene. So right as Banquo was entering, he's heard to say, "Give us light there, ho," from off stage. And then later somebody says, "A light, a light." And then at the ends, who did strike out the light? One of the murderers strikes out the torch or whatever the light source is. The Stratford Festival again, very dark. It's just a lamp, right? You can't really see anybody. And then the Folger Theater production from 2008 with Two River Theater in conjunction with Two River Company intersperses this scene or mixes this scene with the Full of Scorpions is My Mind, Dear Wife scene. So center there you have Macbeth and Lady Macbeth sitting on the throne, sort of making out and having this conversation. and behind them, this murder scene happens. So that's Banquo and Flance right behind the throne, and the murderers there to the left, in just a little bit of light. But I really wanted you to see how this lighting can create this pool where we know something, and then as Macbeth as Flance and Banquo cross, right, they get more into the dark as they cross the stage. This is the Stratford Festival. You can see center there is Flance, and to the right on the top there is Banquo struggling with one of the murderers, right? And so if you see it's dark, and then you see this, a flash of this, and then it goes dark again. Is Banquo murdered? Is Flance murdered? Does Flance escape, right? When you hear Banquo tell him to escape, you might not know. And then this production is from the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2019, and it is a very modern. It's set in a very modern setting, and the additional murderer that comes on, right, that joins the party during the scene when he sort of strikes out the light, goes over and kills a breaker switch on the wall, right? And so you can't really see, sort of in the center between the two murderers in white is Banquo's body on the ground there. And so it's a different sort of approach to the absence or presence of light, and what that can physically mean for the audience, but they maintain this sort of blue glow so that you, the audience, can still sort of see what's happening. But there are some moments of absolute darkness in this production where you might not know until the lights come back up. And so I want to think about sort of contrasting that with, again, Shakespeare's Globe, which, right, it looks dark around the sides, but definitely much brighter than what's happening in any of these other contemporary productions. So I think the other thing that we have to think about is film, right? I tend to try to sort of bridge this gap, consciously or not. So these are just a few really famous films of Macbeth. You may or may not have seen some of them. Roman Polanski's 1971 film adaptation, Trevor Nunn's 1977 film, which was based on a very experimental production that he directed on stage in England at the Royal Shakespeare, at their other place, their experimental theater with Ian McKellen. Greg Doran's film, again based on a stage production. And then Rupert Gould's 2010, which stars Patrick Stewart. And then the Justin Kurzel film in 2015, which is probably one that you've seen. I didn't include, just for lack of space, the Orson Welles film, which is doing some very interesting things. And I think Welles, in many ways, really epitomizes the way that film productions tend to push very specific interpretations, and I think limit the audience's creative input. Film, it sort of seems to bridge a gap, but you get so much cuts, lighting, and close-ups that indicate scene or mood that really narrow what you can do, right? The camera directs your eye in a very specific way that stage productions do not. So not only does it not respond to you in real time the way that live actors do, but it really, really gives you a direct vision. So when you see a production of Macbeth, or any play really, I think the question is, how much do you expect to co-create the world of the play? Do you find multiple possibilities in the rich language of a writer like Shakespeare? Or do you find yourself given one interpretation of those possibilities by a director? And how do we reconcile all of the different versions that we might see of the same text? Dr. Doty's lecture argues that the play is interested in the consequences of action and the choice to act. The choice made by Macbeth himself, right? Or even the choice to not act, which I think is the choice that Banquo makes, right? When he is also given a prophecy, right, by the witches. And I want to leave you with a question about choice. Are there consequences for our own imaginative choices that we make as readers or as audiences when we engage with these plays? Thank you.